Hello, 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 everyone. Good afternoon, I guess evening at this point. This is what happens when you work all day. It's 6 o'clock. I'm gonna give us some time to come in. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about unresolved trauma. Um, every Wednesday, I come on, or I will start coming on at 6 to 6:15 to kind of go through a subject and or to really in the new year start talking about that one word Wednesday. And so we're going to give everyone a few minutes to join us. Forgive the box behind me. I'm sure it's something that Amazon may have sent. I don't know. Uh, Everything else is non-movable. Like y'all gonna have to just see these shoes, and you're gonna have to see this music behind me. So I hope you guys are here. I'm gonna give it a couple more minutes to see if we get some people to join us, and then I am going to get started. Because tonight I actually am going to go to an event, or to go into a virtual event with Nikki Giovanni. If you haven't already registered, it's something worth looking into tonight to talk about her poetry book. So let's give it a couple more minutes. Hello, 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 everyone. I'm always happy to be here. Uh, we had two amazing already lives this week. We had Michelle on Monday. She usually goes live at 5 o'clock p.m. on Mondays. And then we had Sasha, who started her first one yesterday for Total Fitness Tuesdays. And she went live at around 3 o'clock yesterday. And so we'll give it a few more minutes and then I'm going to get started talking about ways to identify. And these are just three ways. Literally, I probably could give you multiple ways to recognize unresolved trauma, but I'm just going to really stick with three so that way we can focus in on those three and talk about how they may show up and or how you could notice these in yourself to see if there's some issues or unresolved trauma that you might be dealing with. Again, these three that I'm giving do not encompass the many signs that that a person may be dealing with trauma. And so I am going to get started. Let me just open up this document really quickly. I think it's easier for me to have this in front of me. Again, trying to give y'all some time to kick in to get here with me. Uh, 6 p.m. is what's best for me on my full day of therapy. I chose Wednesday because my therapy hat is on. If you know me, I don't only do therapy, but on Wednesdays and Mondays and Wednesdays, those are the days that I primarily see clients. And so I chose Wednesday because it allows me to be in this hat and in this role. All right, so let's talk unresolved trauma. So I'm going to give you three of the ones that I see often in the work that I do, specifically with Black women and young adolescent females, just Black women in general. And so the first one is the inability to tolerate conflict. What that means is inability to tolerate conflict, the inability to tolerate conflict with others. You have this fear of running into conflict directly. Looking at your perspective and acknowledging it and communicating it to your partners or those people in your life. You avoid conflict at all costs because what it brings up in you is such a high level of anxiety. And so, really, what that means is that instead of dealing with the conflict, you will retreat, you will leave, and or avoid relationships at all. And so, when many times people will think that this only means that I don't like to fight, quote unquote. But the reality is that some conflicts or some conflicts are just simply resolved by having the appropriate communication skills. And what you do instead of even to even get to the point of communicating or getting to the point of actually trying to communicate what the conflict or resolve what the conflict is about, you actually avoid it at all costs and or determine that you just will not and cannot deal with it. Um, so the reason why I chose this one out of the many that I was going to do is that because many times we think that this means that you have to be generally this person who's aggressive or assertive, um, to be able to handle conflict. But in reality, the human being has multiple types of conflict daily. And how we handle that is based off of what we feel around anxiety and or worry about what people think about us or might think about us if we do a certain action. And so it's important to learn to resolve conflict so that you can actually help not just yourself but even others in the relationships you have. The second one that I chose was the inability to tolerate intensive feelings. When we think about negative feelings, we automatically go to the extreme of depression or sadness or very high anxiety around an area. But when we just really think of any type of emotion, the intensity of that emotion is what you're trying to avoid. So even intense happiness is something that you try to move away from, you try not to be a part of, because what it does is it gives you this false sense of hope or help. And so you're almost like suspicious or thinking that something is off and or you're guilty of something that you're not deserving of that happiness. So when I say the inability to tolerate intensive feelings, it's not just the negative ones, it's even positive. When we think about anger, being upset, most human beings have anger and get upset, but when it gets too intense, what you do or you try to do is actually retreat from feeling the emotion, dealing with the emotion, or even having anything related to that emotion come up in your life. And so this is extremely important for you to think about if it's related to trauma, because what happens when we are not able to tolerate emotions, that also means that we're having a hard time to communicate our own emotions and to articulate what we need in our relationships. And so the this one specifically, I chose it because although the conflict is that you are struggling with the intensity of the emotion, how it impacts your relationships, how it impacts your ability to communicate your feelings to others is just as important as that first one, which is to deal with the actual conflict and the intensity of a conflict, meaning how much can I handle to even deal with the person. And so it's really important for you to think about, am I struggling to tolerate intense emotions, both good and bad? And when I mean intense, I'm not just saying, oh, well, something shocked you and all of a sudden you're like, oh no, that scared me. No, I mean, where literally you have the thought that if you get into a major argument and it breaks your heart and or you feel sad, then that means that you are no longer going to be loved, right? So it's like these extreme feelings related to emotions. And so really kind of deciding, am I avoiding feeling in order to maintain safety? And what I mean by that, am I avoiding both good and bad in order to stay in control of what I view as safety in my emotions? And so, really, it's not a negative to have intense emotions. It's not a negative to have intense responses to things that violate us or harm us. That's not a negative. The negative is, how do we deal with these intense emotions? The negative is when we take those intense emotions and actually harm other people as a result of those emotions. And so I think it's important as we think of those first two, which is the tolerance of your intense emotions, but then also the avoidance of conflict and how they relate to each other, is so important when it comes to unresolved trauma. Specifically because if you are avoiding conflict and you're avoiding the emotions related to that conflict, you are unable to resolve the things that actually might be making you anxious, that also might be making you depressed, that also might be making you feel less than or having conflict in your self esteem. So, really connecting those first two are extremely important. Again, the first two being the inability to, or the first one being the inability to deal with or have conflict, right? Which means I'm avoiding it at all costs. I don't even care if I'm right. I don't care if I have a point to or a boundary I need to communicate. I just need to avoid the argument and or the feeling of that conflict. And then the second one is that inability to tolerate conflict. And then the last one, and this one, I'm going to bring them all together at the end. But this one is about how we think. So most times when we have unresolved trauma, we specifically have what is considered black and white thinking. And black and white thinking is this all or nothing, an all or nothing approach to everything, which means that anything that I do, I have to have this absolute way that I resolve it and or deal with it for me to feel safe. And so if someone hurts me, I'm cutting them off. I'm not going to communicate. I'm not going to decide that I can have ways to set new boundaries. I'm just going to go straight to the cutoff. If someone makes me feel abandoned, all of a sudden it means that I'm not loved, I'm not safe, I'm not even in an intimate relationship with that person. So you might see this when, or this might come up when you're first dating someone and you having this feeling of anxiety that they're not calling you back, or they're not um, giving you the time of day, or you feel like you're being ghosted after the first day of meeting the person and they literally may have just been at work or couldn't give you a call that day because of an emergency. And so you go to the extreme of when someone is not interested, it must mean that I'm not worthy of love and or feeling levels of rejection, right? And so this black and white feeling leads to a high level of anxiety because nothing, almost nothing in this world is absolute, right? Which means that there are gray areas, and they're gray. Those gray areas matter when we are trying to navigate relationships, navigate experiences, and having empathy not just for ourselves but also for others. And so, with black and white thinking, you ultimately start to feel like you are at the risk of being harmed. And no matter what, you need to figure out ways to not be harmed. And you will do everything in your power to do so. And so, if we think about those three together, the lack of wanting to deal with conflict, the lack of wanting to deal with intense emotions, and then having a very absolute black or white thinking, those things, when it comes to unresolved trauma, all surround areas of anxiety, depression, and areas of lowered self esteem and how you see yourself. So it's important for us to know that if we are noticing that we hate conflict, we run from it, we avoid it at all costs, that that might be a sign that somehow there was power taken away from us where our safety was at risk. And so, therefore, I avoid that at all costs. The second thing, if the intensity of the emotions make you feel like you have to run and hide, you can't deal with them, you don't want to deal with them, that's another sign. And then the last one was black and white thinking that actually ultimately impacts both of those areas. And all three of those areas impact each other. And then the last one, I'm going to give you a bonus. And I'm not going to talk too long about this one because this goes into like attachment disorders and all these different things that people may struggle with trauma. Um, However, what I am going to say is disorganized relationships and dysfunctional relationships are also another example of when you may be experiencing unresolved trauma. What this means is that you frequently find yourself in these love hate relationships where it's like, oh, I used to be best friends with someone. Now we're the worst enemies of each other. Oh, I used to love this man with all of my heart, and then now I can't stand the even thought or sight of him. And these conflicts are not always short term or even long term. They can be frequently within the same relationship where it's like one day we're really, really good, the next day we're really, really bad because our pattern in our relationship is so unhealthy. And so that might be an issue related to the intensity level of the actual relationship that can be caused by trying to attach so that you don't feel rejected. So that was a bonus, but I'm not going to get into that because I can do a whole spill on that related to attachment disorder. That being said, I see we have some people joining me. I did not know you were here with me, so thank you. Um, any questions before I go? I just wanted to drop in. I'm going to be doing these little 15-minute um, drop ins on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. for moving forward because I feel like you guys get me with my therapy hat on. I can give you some explanations. Usually, I choose the topic based off of what I've maybe been dealing with my actual clients of the day. And so I wanted to talk today about unresolved trauma because literally every client I saw today was a Black woman, and each of them had different layers of trauma, and they're in some ways they're resolving them obviously because they're in treatment with me. However, how they navigate their lives is about that unresolved trauma. And so any questions that you have that I can help you with related to those specific areas and or others. So, what advice with someone with BPD? So, BPD by standards could be borderline personalities or it could be bipolar disorder. So you have to clarify which one you are asking me about, and then I can try to see if I can help. Because when we think of both of those disorders, they deal with regulation of mood, but they are not the same when it comes to the intensity feeling. And so, can you give some more example of intensity feelings? Oh, wow. So, more examples of intensity feelings, all or nothing. Well, intensity feelings can look like I fell in love with someone in the on the first date and I can't live without them, and all of a sudden I feel rejected if they don't call me, don't talk to me, don't want to be with me, have this level of disconnect if the person isn't showing me what I'm starting to feel. Right, so that could be an example. Another thing about intense emotions, when we think about, I talked about the positive at the beginning, but the negative intense emotions might be anger, rage, a layer of actual rage that actually indicates that you would harm yourself or someone else, right? And so those intensity levels are really just thinking about the different types of emotions and how you fall on the spectrum of that emotion. So, for example, if the emotion is anxiety, am I anxious in the middle where it's like, okay, I'm worried about things, but I don't have a specific anxiety over one thing? Or am I at the end of that spectrum where I find myself worrying about every single thing to the point where I'm not even able to navigate the world and or to go to work or to have functional relationships because I'm worried so constantly about all the things, not just one, right? And so intensity is not just about one feeling, it's about identifying the layers of emotions we have and then seeing how you fall on the spectrum of that emotion and then how often, right? Sometimes we all fall on different parts of the spectrum when it comes to emotions, but that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with us, right? Because you can be intensely angry over something. The world this year made me very intensely angry when it came to how they treated Black bodies, right? That's an example of a normal, intense feeling. However, if I'm living in that intense rage all the time, then I need to consider, is that about me having some level of unresolved trauma? And now, which emotion it is will also kind of help you to determine if what type of trauma you've dealt with. So, but I won't get into that because that's like a one-on-one clinical thing. Oh, we have another therapist in the house. Hi, Toya. So I also, you said it's borderline. So let me go back to the original question related to tips for borderlines. Um, so literally, I'm going to say the safest ones that I can think of because borderline, depending on where you fall on that spectrum, have very different and intense emotions. And those intense emotions usually surround the feelings of rejection and the feelings of not being loved or wanted or accepted. And so it becomes extremely important for you to be able to learn how to regulate your emotions and or to self-soothe if you're not able to regulate that emotion. So I would even say my biggest tip is to learn your ways to self-soothe. So for example, with some of the young ladies that we've worked with or ladies that I've worked with, um, we've done things like how do you hold ice when you're in rage, right? So you go into the freezer, you pick a piece of ice, and it makes your body feel something to separate you from that emotion that you were feeling. That seems odd, but what it does is it distracts you as well as it soothes you, which means that it brings you down from the intensity of that emotion. And I'm specifically saying these for borderline because if you are navigating the world with that personality disorder, the layers of unregulated emotions requires you to learn how to self-soothe so that you can be safe. And so I would say start creating your list of ways to self-soothe. Start creating your list of ways to demonstrate self-love and compassion, right? And start learning to journal in a way that is healthy. um, and when I say healthy, I really hate using that word because I don't always think that is fair, right? But learn to journal in a way that it benefits you releasing those emotions without harming yourself or others. And so I would say for my biggest tip for borderlines would be learning your individual self-soothing tools. One of the books that I still use to this day that is really good for those who are learning how to function or deal with someone who is borderline. It's called Walking on Eggshells. And so if you actually are interested in that, you can probably Google it. But I absolutely think there's a PDF on somewhere in Google. Don't tell Google World I told you that. But it's called Walking on Eggshells. And what it can do is help you to see some of the things that you can do to kind of like self soothe and take care of yourself. Um, all right, I think this is gonna be our last question because I do want to go see Nikki Giovanni today at 7. So I'm gonna read this one and see if I can give you guys some help. Because of COVID, the therapist session were cut after losing insurance due to job. I haven't been able to secure an affordable one. As a result, trauma lingers on the surface and seemed intensified as I'm sure it does. I'm sorry to hear that. As the month goes on, any advice on how to keep at bay until I can get back in therapy? Similar to the borderline definition and or dealing with it, I would specifically say finding things that bring you immediate joy and distraction. And this is a temporary solution. Please hear this as temporary. There is and I'm going to say this in the please therapist world, don't get offended at me. Hi therapists that are out there, because I know y'all did to you. There is the techniques and tools that help you through trauma, like meditation and all those great things, but they are not going to resolve your trauma. And so listen to when I say this part, I mean temporary solutions. You got to get back into that approach where a therapist can work one-on-one with you with your individual trauma, but find some very concrete ways that you can really deal with joy and distracting those triggers over this next few months, and especially until you can get back in. The other thing is look at um, open collective path, opencollectivepath.org or .com. They actually have affordable therapists between the price of 30 to $60 for those who cannot afford, or don't have insurance. And so I would say really kind of finding those distractions and moments of joys that you can be concrete on. For me, it's things like journaling. For me, it's things like coloring. For another person, it might be listening to music, dancing, actually making sure you exercise at a certain time each day, right? So find yourself a list of different things you can do. I see that someone said gratitude. That's very, very important. Literally, gratitude has been proven to change the way our brains work. And part of what trauma does is it changes our brain. So trying to change it back is actually really helpful. So think about very concrete ways that you can actually start to demonstrate self-soothing through techniques that bring you joy. Um, Tomorrow during emotional health Thursday conversation, we do it at 4:30 ish every every Thursday. If you drop in, maybe what we can do is make that part of what we talk about tomorrow during that end of our session, which can be also about the reality of how the holidays intensify most of our emotions, good and bad. And so I hope that was helpful. I see a few more things and then I'm bouncing on y'all because I don't want to miss Nikki. For someone who has realized they still have unresolved trauma, what would be your first step and that you would take for healing? The first step, the fact is that if you can acknowledge that you have the unresolved trauma, you've taken the first step. And so I think what I would say, to be fair, is to be able to be compassionate to yourself. So the first thing I would do is to acknowledge that I did not know, I know now. And so I will take steps that is about my healing. And some of those steps will include reaching out for the appropriate support, a therapist and or someone who specializes in trauma as their method of healing. And then also making sure you acknowledge that you have the skills to take care of yourself. You just don't have the way to guide yourself in those skills. And so give yourself permission to also know that you are an authority on your life and on your goals of healing, and a therapist and or a companion on your journey of healing is just that, someone that will help you to guide those things that are inside of you that you may not already know of, and they'll just put language to it, they'll just put words to it, and they will then give you skills and techniques that may have help you to adapt moving forward. And so I hope that answers your question. You've already started. And so the next step is really in that true honoring of healing ourselves. is to help find the right and appropriate guide to be with you. And in my case, obviously, I'm going to go with a therapist because I understand the severity of trauma and how it impacts our lives. Others may say differently, but I hope that you would consider your own healing and passionately go after joy is my thing. Everything I've talked about this year ends with justice and joy. If you know me, I sit on a thought of I will forever love Black women and forever be in our corners. But that also means it's painful to live and to navigate the world as a Black woman. And so I will always fight for justice for us, but I will only do that if I'm allowed to live in my joy. And so I hope each of you find that moment of joy, that joy distraction, and I will see you guys next Wednesday, even though I think that might be my anniversary. I'm not sure. If it's my anniversary, you might not see me. But if it is, you'll see me again next Wednesday at 6 p.m. I'm always open to topics that would make you want to hear about, but I wanted to start with the series of three. Last week we talked three reasons, and I can't remember what the reasons were. And this week we're talking unresolved trauma, and next week I have some other stuff. Take care, and you guys be well.